Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and in today's video we're going to be looking at Riho Bonespear. Some of you may be building your Riho Bonespear following the times 10 or times 15 event that was on, I think, last weekend, because this is the first clan versus clan window since you have probably got her. So I thought it was a good opportunity to do a bit of a guide overview of how Riho works, where you should use her, what kind of builds should you put on her, and what kind of mastery setup does she benefit from. Now, she is an ultra specialist boss killer specifically for endgame content because of the single target debuffs you can place on an enemy, which makes her very unique for that effect. There are a few other champions in the game, specifically someone like Romantu that kind of throws lots of debuffs on a single target, and I think there's also one other one I could be thinking of which I can't remember that also throws loads of debuffs on a single target. Let's do a bit of an ability breakdown here. So we've got A1, Absorption, places a continuous heal buff on the ally with the lowest HP, also places a 7.5%, so the weaker version, on all allies with 30% less HP. So it's kind of like a very good top-up healer ability. It's nothing super crazy because 7.5% is not crazy if your allies are low health. For example, let's just go take a standard damage dealer that I've got here. Let's take Rathalos Blade Master. It's a little bit higher because I got a blessing. 45,000 here is really only going to be about a 3,000 to 4,000 heal because 7.5% is nothing crazy, right? So that's what you got to remember here is, although it's pretty good healing if you're low health, it's not going to dramatically heal you back up on this A1. It's a nice to have ability, Absorption. The 15% is a little bit stronger. It would be about a 7,000, for example, on there. Just be mindful as well, if you're using it in somewhere like Hydra, you don't want to necessarily stack up lots of continuous heals on the wrong target. Now, this is Riho's signature ability, Pressure Points. This is the one that makes Riho specifically a monster for high-end bosses. It's going to place a stun debuff on the target enemy for one turn. Stun doesn't work on bosses, but it works everywhere else, as well as a HP burn, a 60% decreased defense, a 25% weaken, a 50% decreased attack, and a 30% decreased crit rate, all for 2 turns, and attacks the target. Now, the damage on this ability is not bad either, so she's a pretty good support damage dealer because you're also getting burn at the same time. These are all the debuffs you need to deal with a boss. Decreased defense, weaken, there's your damage output. Decrease attack and decrease crit rate, which often many people underestimate the value of. Basically stops the boss from hurting you. It's so good. It's very good against Wrathhead. It's very good against lots of high damage opponents, these decrease attack and decrease crit rate. Now, the decreased crit rate is specifically valuable for some of the newer bosses because they tend to modify their crit rate up higher. Every PvE content that you fight, you will normally find the enemies having a 15% crit rate base chance, right? Your heroes have a 15% base crit rate chance, so do the opponents you face, including many of the bosses. However, in Phantom Shogun's Grove, in Amius, that crit rate is increased significantly. It goes up to 50%, which is a much higher rate and a much more scary prospect when you're critically increasing the damage of someone with like 30,000 attack, right? That's how much attack the Shogun boss has. So being able to take that 50% down to 20%, or even if it's a 15% crit rate down to 0, this basically neutralizes the boss's damage, or it brings it really down to its previous level. So it's very powerful. The stun is pretty good if you need to target specific enemies in waves, but what we're really looking at here is the damage from burn and the damage bonuses from decreased defense weaken, along with the survivability, decreased attack, and decreased crit rate. And because it's a 3-turn cooldown, you're probably with Master Hexer keeping at least some of these up all the time. Very, very powerful. Then we get Perfect Body, removes all debuffs from all allies, then places a block debuffs on them for 2 turns, and it will heal them by 35% of their max HP and a further 5% for each debuff removed. This is a phenomenally powerful heal. You're going to get 20% on top of that 35% as well, so it's going to increase the value of the heal. Even if you remove 2 debuffs, that's 10% more, so you're pretty much half healing people. Throw in healing masteries, this booked concept on a 3-turn cooldown. She becomes a very powerful healer, very much like a Wither the Crowned type healer. The fact you also get a full cleanse and a block debuffs means that you can use her in places such as the Shogun Grove, where you get those enfeeble debuffs come in and then you can just cleanse them off. This is why she's like probably the best champion for Shogun Grove for a speed team. Finally, we have this passive Reflect. When receiving any debuffs, instantly transfers them from this champion to the attacker. So they do have this context now where it says will not transfer debuffs that cannot be removed. This is slightly different from, say, Yumiko's A2 and a deflection set. A deflection set has very similar language because this says has a 25% chance to deflect one debuff onto the attacker. It feels like it's similar. It's not. The difference here is Reflect is going to receive the debuff and then instantly send it back. This is why it can't send back protected debuffs, because the way that debuffs or buffs are applied is it applies the buff, then it applies the protection status. Now with debuffs, that basically means it kind of goes to this flow of apply the debuff, apply the protection status. Can I then transfer it back? Yes, I can transfer it back. So the transfer is checked after the protection status, whereas with deflect, it's never actually placed on you to begin with. So therefore, when you're using Yumiko's Hex or when you're using Deflection set, the process goes, apply debuff. Can I reflect it back? Yes. If I do, great. It doesn't actually place it on you to begin with, which is why it's different. I know this can be a bit confusing, but that is why. This will transfer any non-protected debuff back onto the enemy once on a 3-turn cooldown. It will also do all debuffs placed in the same interactions. So if you have an ability that places decrease attack and decrease defense, like a Madame Ceres, it will send all of them back in one go. We have a really useless aura, and that is basically Riho's kit in a nutshell. She's a very strong healer, she's a very strong debuffer, and she can at least send some debuffs back, which most of the time it's more of an annoyance than it is actually useful. You can't really leverage much power here. It's not like Stultus, where she's permanently immune to decreased defense. That's much more powerful than this effect here. So for the mastery tree I've got set up here, I've gone with War Master and I've gone with support. I haven't actually gone for healing. You could make the argument that healing masteries would be better here, like the 10% healing, the 5% healing. The reason why I've gone support is you really need as much accuracy as you can possibly gain in order to get the accuracy requirements for some of this end game content. It's actually quite an extremely high accuracy requirement you need. So even 10 accuracy here is worth its weight over, say, a little bit more healing. And generally the healing is already quite powerful, that more healing is not necessarily required. I've also taken Whirlwind of Death just because she can do a fair bit of damage. And I've taken Master Hexer as well. You don't really need Sniper. Sniper's kind of useless. You don't need Sniper at all. It doesn't do anything. But at the same time, what are you going to take? You could take Spirit Haste or you could take Kill Streak. This Kill Streak and Spirit Haste is not ideal in boss content like Clan Boss, where you're not going to really take much. You could bring Stoke to Fury. That would be a better option if you know for like Hydra you're going to take some poison damage. But yeah, Sniper I probably shouldn't have this one here. I think I built it for Clan Boss back in the day. I do take Cycle of Violence, not because I necessarily think I can get 30%, but on wave content, you often can breach 30%. So if you're using her to get to a boss, then you can naturally sometimes proc Cycle of Violence. And again, what else are you going to use? Evil Eye, you generally don't really have much value for. Cycle of Magic, we can't use because of Amius. So the build that I've got her in is particularly designed for Shogun Grove. That's where I use her more than anything else, is Phantom Shogun Grove. And that has an extremely steep accuracy requirement. You need to have 605 accuracy. And for my team, I need to have her extremely fast as well. So I've got her at 294 speed, 593 accuracy at the moment. But naturally, we've got area bonuses now. So we can go into the Phantom Shogun Grove, and you can see I went and invested a bit of accuracy. Very cheap to get a little bit of accuracy. It's only going to cost me, a couple of live arena wins to get 2 upgrades. That got me to the 605 that I needed just to give me a little bit more accuracy, because trying to get to 609 at this speed is incredibly difficult. She will naturally be quite tanky because of the way that she's just built. She's got a very high base HP. And she can put out a nice bit of damage. So you can see the build that I've got her in is not any particular sets. Now you could, if you wanted to, go for something like a retaliation set to try and maximize the value of this. The other way you could do it is go for like a merciless reflex build if you wanted to try and rotate this more often or get back to both of these abilities more often. But generally on 3-turn cooldown, you might not need to do that too often. If you're going to use her in Hydra, I absolutely recommend you would use a very strong debuff extender. Someone like, if you absolutely were an endgame Kraken, Carnage would be phenomenal in his base form. Carnage and Riho is basically like AoE debuffs if you use him in his base form. If you don't have him, you can go towards something like Akemtum, who is an exceptional debuff spreader with a Hex debuff. The only thing you've got to be careful with Akemtum here is how many poisons he puts out. Otherwise, he will spread the debuffs of Riho everywhere. And that's a lot of debuffs. Decreased defense, weaken, HP burn. These are 3 core debuffs that really help you scale your damage in Hydra. And don't forget, you've got that cleanse and healing as well. So she can provide a supportive role as well as a debuffing role. There are other debuff spreaders. For example, 2 Hanorak comes to mind. You get nice amounts of debuff spread on, I think, the A2. There you go, the 2 random debuffs. So if you pair her with a debuff spreader, you can use her in sort of Hydra content. But this is the team that I use her in more than anything else. And I use her just to provide the core debuffs. What makes her really good in this team is she can provide the decreased defense and weaken, and more importantly, the decreased crit rate, because you've got to keep someone alive who's your enfeeble target. The target that I've got is Renegade. I've got to keep Renegade alive. The moment Renegade dies, this team fails. So decreased crit rate will help mitigate the amount of damage my Renegade is going to take because it's far less likely to crit. So we're using that, and then we're using the Whispers to set up the damage. Now, Whisper needs decreased defense, weaken, in order to get that extra turn on the A3. That's what enables this extra turn. And we really would like to go A3 into A2. We don't want to go A2 into A3. So we need the crit rate buff as well, which is where Scartorsis comes in. So Scartorsis enables us with Riho to be able to make her go A3 into A2. If you don't have Riho in this team, you just can't do this, because once the boss takes a turn, he's going to use his Scourge Sword, and he's going to debuff spread Enfeeble onto everyone, which we know if you weak hit the boss, he increases his counter, and it's a bit of a disaster. So you need to have a cleanse. So what she is bringing here is the debuffs on top of the cleanse, and I don't quite have enough damage on my 2 6-star Whispers to be able to one-shot the boss in 2 rotations. The burn, along with the brimstone that she's currently wearing, is going to get us through that gap. It's going to give us a little bit of damage to basically get us over the line. So you can see when I run this through here how powerful these debuffs are. So we're going to come in here and you can see straight away the value of these debuffs. So we're going to have burn, decreased defense, weaken, decreased attack, and decreased crit rate. That sets us up for the Whisper animations here. So you can see Riho is really essential, but the big part that makes her so good for this encounter is this phase. We need to get rid of these debuffs. She will instantly cleanse them, fully heal my enfeebled target pretty much, which means that my enfeebled target can now take an extra hit. And if I don't quite have enough damage, which you can see I just don't quite have enough damage yet, until the burn finishes it off. This is where I think she is absolutely insane. You can use her as well for a Sand Devil team. Now, I don't actually have the components to make this team work. So what you bring is something like this setup, but you would need the right champion. So you would need probably another multi-hit max HP, someone like an Acrisia, Marius the Gallant, a Warmaster or Thorian, or another Newt, something of those natures to replace the Royal Guard. And then you would want a affinity positive or affinity neutral, something like a Void Sleep champion. It could be Chancellor Adeline if you wanted to use her. Like, we could absolutely, if I bothered to even take a look at Adeline, not that anyone has done this, put Adeline in here so that she could be that lead. She would apply the sleep, and then you go max HP after you've applied the debuffs. The important thing about Sand Devil, he has a passive. He will decrease incoming damage by enemy skills by a flat 75% on stage 25. This damage reduction is reduced by each debuff that is on Alnaimer. So the fact you can have burn, decreased defense, decreased attack, weaken, decreased crit rate, these are 5 buffs. So you automatically halve that 75 down. And if you apply something like a brimstone on top, that's 6 buffs. If you can get a toxic set on your Riho Bonespear, then that's 7 potentially if you get lucky with the proc. And all of those individual reductions makes it much easier for you to hit level cap. Now, I will say with max HP, it's a little bit less problematic because, you don't need to work so hard. You can get some ignore defense, you can get some more different things. But keep in mind, just like Hydra, if you put a 40% penalty on my damage, that's going to really push your crit damage requirements up. So every debuff that you can apply here is going to significantly make this more viable. Especially if you haven't got 2 Newts and you've only got like an Acrisia or a Warmaster or Thorian. Once Marius comes in and you start getting him, he can kind of replace Newt as well. So that is why Riho works really well in this team, because she can apply so many debuffs in so many times, but more importantly as well, 1 hit. If you used Ramantu here, it's 4 hits, which means the boss takes a lot more sleep counters. When she only does 1 hit, it's much easier. So that is the type of team you would use. The reset would be someone like a Kaimara, a Yumiko, or a Crixia rather than a Renegade. Renegade might work if you have the right setup, but that's kind of like the setup you would need for this really super fast team. This can do this in like 10 to 15 seconds when set up properly. Other places you can use Riho Bonespear. She's not too bad in Arena. I generally don't use her in arena because she has to have so many PvE stats, right? You need to have so much accuracy. If you were to use her in arena, you're probably using her more as a reflect cleanser than you are using her as a debuffer, because those 5 debuffs, for sure, it's probably going to get you polymorphed. I mean, the good thing is the change that they introduced with polymorph means you're only rolling 25% once, but it's still a chance that you're going to get polymorphed. So you're more than likely going to be using her either as a cleanse with a heal or some sort of deflection effect where you can send it back and then cleanse. You know, something like that setup you could use. I personally don't use it. I have Ancora for that, but that's how you could use her. But you would build her much more aligned to surviving rather than where I've got it, which is like accuracy to place a debuff and hope for the best kind of scenario. I have seen as well, and it's not something I'm able to test in this video because we're in the wrong rotation, she can solo Sorath hard because of her ability to deflect debuffs and cleanse and heal and also place healing on herself. Along with the HP burn, she is capable of soloing Sorath 120 hard as an answer, because again, you're building her with high accuracy for endgame content. You can make her tanky enough so that she survives all of those things. And every 3 turns, you're going to get a free sort of cleanse of those debuffs and send it back. So if you get frozen, you'll send it back so you won't actually get that freeze. Obviously, you can't freeze the boss, but you will deflect those debuffs back. So in terms of other sets, I think she is very good for if you wanted to build her this way. Protection 9 out of 9, if you've got those accessories, is incredibly good because she is going to place at least 1 or 2 debuffs, 1 or 2 buffs on your team. So that is potentially 5 to 10% more damage. It's nothing crazy, but it is additional damage you can give to the team. Absolutely is worthwhile. So there you go, guys. Riho Bonespear. She is a pinnacle high-end boss killer. That is the best place for her. Killing the top of Doom Tower, killing Shogun Grove, killing Sand Devil. Single target boss encounters she is exceptional for. She can have some utility in arena, but I wouldn't recommend necessarily unless you have limited cleansing options. In Hydra, if you're going to use her in Hydra, absolutely use her alongside a debuff spreader, someone like Carnage, someone like Akemtum, so that you can spread her debuffs onto everyone. That's when she becomes really powerful. As a single target, she's a bit limited, so you really need to have some form of debuff spreading. And she could also go into your clan boss team if you wanted to. She does bring all the priority debuffs that you need. She does have a cleanse, so you can deal with the stun. I do have some old teams that I built with her. I think around the Myth Watchers team, or could have been Ruella that I used, that used Riho. You basically put her in this, you get the cleanse with the debuffs. So it could work in clan boss as well. There we go, guys. Thanks for watching as always, and I will catch you in the next video.